Good morning. Here we are. We are ready for Heritage Studies. So, have the bulletin board up here on the screen so you can see it. Remember, we've been talking about innovations and inventions. We've been talking about the car mainly, the automobile. Remember the very first one we learned about, the very first one that was made was the Model T in 1908. Let's turn in your book to page 26. And we're just going to do a little bit of reading here, a little bit of talking. I'm trying not to make this a very long lesson. And then you have a crossword puzzle to do for your assignment. So let's look at page 26. Do you see the picture at the bottom of page 26, that black and white picture? It says that's a Model T. It says the Model T was large enough for a family to ride in comfortably. Now, I'm sorry to say that my family would not be able to fit in a Model T comfortably. I think we would probably need at least 2 or 3 Model Ts, but that's okay. All right, so there's a picture right above the black and white picture, that little one. He said that guy's changing a flat tire, and all he had to do was pump it up. They just had to be pumped up again, almost like a bicycle tire. Let's read up here at the top of page 26. And we're going to find out what were some of the requirements of driving in those days. Because, today you have to have a driver's license, you got to have insurance, you got to have all that kind of stuff. So let's learn about some of the requirements. And also we're going to be talking about some of the names of different car makers today that go back. Okay, the Model T became one of the most famous cars in history. It sold faster than any other car in the United States as well as in other countries. Also, it was easy to drive and easy to fix, even if it broke down on the road. At first, a driver didn't need a license to operate a car. He could just pay for 2 hours of instructions from the Ford Motor Company and then drive off on his own. Or, if he preferred, he could simply drive off right after buying the car. This is very different from getting a car today. Owning cars changed the lives of Americans. Driving gave people more freedom than they had before. People could now live in one town and they could work in another town. And, pardon me, and they could take trips according to their own schedules, not according to the railroad schedules. Because remember, we talked about the railroad schedules being that that's the only time you could leave the town or you could go on a vacation was whenever the railroad was going. So, and today you have to wait till you're 16 and then you got to take all these courses and you got to practice driving and then you got to go to the DMV and you got to take tests and show them that you can do this and that, and then you have to keep your license updated ever so often, and you got to make sure you pay for I'm sorry, auto insurance, and so much to worry about. So pardon me. So how did the car offer more flexibility to families? They could work where they wanted to work. They could go on vacation. They could go and take picnics if they wanted to. They could get to church more quickly. Maybe they wanted to go to a church that was a little further, whereas before it was walking or riding the carriage, to church. So let's look here at page 27. Now this page is called Echoes in History, Names from the Past. So let's read this and we're going to learn about some different names that you may have heard of before. When you go past a car sales lot and see cars called Dodge or Chevrolet, you're seeing a little piece of the past. Early in the 20th century, that's early in the 1900s, some people started car companies that are still around today. David Dunbar Buick, born in Scotland and reared in Detroit, opened the Buick Motor Company in 1903. His cars had better engines than earlier cars. Buick's cars could travel farther on 1 gallon of gasoline. One of Buick's workers, Walter Percy Chrysler, became president of the Buick Company. I'm so sorry. Chrysler later founded the Chrysler Corporation that made Chrysler automobiles. My Pacifica that I drive, my van, my minivan, it's a Chrysler. Louis Chevrolet came to the United States from Switzerland to sell an invention. Instead, he became a driver in the newest sport in America, car racing. He had ideas of his own about how cars should be made. In 1911, he helped form the Chevrolet Motor Company. The company later became part of the General Motors Corporation. Louis and his brother Arthur tried to start an airplane company too. Look at that picture down there at the bottom. That's an early racing car, isn't it? Louis Chevrolet, that's him behind the wheel there. And that's a Buick that he's driving. Now, Motor City, you may have heard of Motor City. That's a city in Detroit, the city of Detroit, Michigan, located on the Detroit River, provides the ideal location for car manufacturing. The Detroit River is a route to ship goods and materials from Detroit through the Great Lakes region, while the St. Lawrence Seaway gives Detroit international access by way of the Atlantic Ocean. The abundance of pioneer car makers in the Detroit area gave rise to that city. So Motor City is kind of a nickname for Detroit because it's where so many people started out making cars. And there's some more information here about the Dodge brothers, the Oldsmobile and Cadillac names and different things like that. So the cars that were used in racing, early car racing, were Buicks, but who was the man behind that? It was Mr. Chevrolet. And on our timeline, you can see Ford built his first car in 1896. 1908 was the Model T. That was a Ford. And then in 1911, just a few years later, the Chevrolet Company formed. All right, let's look at the next page, page 28. You ever heard, it's a doozy? You ever heard that phrase before? Well, we're going to tell you about that. Let's look at page 28. John and Horace Dodge were a wild and brawling pair who owned a machine shop in Detroit, Michigan. They had invested in the Ford Motor Company. The brothers also sold car parts to Ford's factory. With the money they made, the Dodges started their own line of cars in 1914. Their cars had 24 horsepower. Horsepower is a bold word right there that you'll have to know what that means. I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute. But Ford's Model T had only 20. The Dodge Company became part of the Chrysler Corporation in 1928. Other brothers were also in the car business. Francis and Freeland Stanley made the respected Stanley steamers. Fred and August Duesenberg produced an automobile that many people think was the finest car of its time. And John and Warren Packard had been making luxury cars since 1900. At the bottom of page 28, you see that fancy schmancy car? That's a 1940 Packard. That's a fancy car. Now, do you see the one kind of at the bottom a little bit? It's kind of a green color picture. That's a Duesenberg from the late 1920s. Now, they thought that the Duesenberg cars were some of the finest. That's where it's a doozy comes in. You ever heard anybody say, it's a doozy? You may or may not have heard somebody say that, but that was kind of the nickname that they gave the Duesenberg cars, and they thought they were the best. So that's where that phrase came from. And up at the top of page 28, you see a picture of the Stanley steamers powered by steam engines. And they continued until about 1924. Now, let's talk about horsepower. Horsepower is the name given to several non-metric units of power. It's an absolute unit of measure that appears on much machinery today. Horsepower is defined as a unit used to measure the power of an engine. The term horsepower was first used by the engineer James Watt. Now, Watt needed a way to rate the capabilities of the steam engines that he made and sold. Engines were replacing horses. So an average horse walked a 24-foot diameter circle and pulled with a force of 180 pounds. Watt calculated that a pony could lift around 220 pounds, 100 feet per minute over a 4-hour period. Believing that a horse was twice as strong as a pony, Watt figured that 1 horsepower would be equal to 33,000 foot-pounds per minute. So horsepower really comes from a calculation used by James Watt figuring the amount of power that a horse had. And so that's why he used horsepower in that, and we still use that term today, horsepower. All right, good deal. So if you would, I'd like for you to do, wait a minute, I think we have one more page to read. Yeah, we have one more page to read. Let's look at the bottom of page 28. We didn't finish that yet either. The names of these early car makers echoed in showrooms and car lots for decades. Some, like Ford, are still echoing today. You can go buy a Ford if you want to. Look at the next page. Now, we're going to learn something today that you've already learned in the past. And I remember in fourth grade heritage studies, one of the chapters we were studying about Henry Ford and how he was the one that invented the assembly line. If you'll look on page 29, on the right-hand side at the top, in dark letters, you're going to see assembly line. At the bottom here, we're going to see an assembly line that's used today. Now, the top of the page says changes that Ford made. Henry Ford changed America by successfully making a car many people could afford. Remember, that was the Model T. However, he also changed the way America manufactured or made goods. When Ford first started making cars, each one had to be put together in his shop. They were made at the rate of one car every 14 hours. The Model T sold for $850. That rate and that price did not suit Ford. We can do better, he said. Why would he want to do better? He had sold 6,000 Model T cars in 1 year. Ford was sure that a lower priced car would benefit everyone. More people could have cars, and he would also benefit by making more money. So Ford had heard of a meat packing business in Ohio that used an assembly line. In an assembly line, each worker does one part of a total job instead of doing the total job alone. In the meatpacking company, each person did his task on a piece of meat and then moved to the next piece. Some companies making rifles and typewriters were also using assembly lines, and Ford thought cars could be made in the same way. So if you think about it, let's think about making a sandwich. Let's think that we have a long cabinet and we got about 4 people standing behind the cabinet with all this stuff out in front of them because we're going to make some sandwiches. So the first person in line gets out the 2 pieces of bread and puts on the mayonnaise or the mustard and then slides the bread to the next person. Okay, when they slide the bread to the next person, that person gets out another 2 slices of bread, puts some more mayonnaise or mustard, and slides it. Well, when they slide it to the second person, they're going to put the ham and the cheese on it. And they're going to slide that to the next person. And they're going to get the next one and put the ham and the cheese. Well, the third person that gets the one with the ham and cheese, they're going to put the lettuce and tomatoes on it. And they're going to slide it to the next one, and they're going to put the pickles on it. And then they're going to put it on the plate. And so it just keeps going down the road. That's an assembly line. That's just a very simple assembly line, but that's the basis of how one works. And that's what Henry Ford did and brought that to America in a big way. And he was able to make a lot more cars that way. Okay, so what I'd like for you to do for your assignment is to do work text page 22. It's a crossword puzzle. Make sure that you use your book, okay? And I may or may not grade this page. I'm not real sure yet. I'll just have to look at it once you get it completed, okay? All right, that will complete our lesson for the day.